Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Prog Report podcast interview. This is Roy. My guest on this episode is drummer and founder of the band O, Anthony Vanacore. The prog metal band hailing from China is about to release their second album on InsideOutMusic called Frailty. It's produced and mixed by Devin Townsend, who also appears on the new single Purge. Got a chance to talk with Anthony about the history of the band, living in China, working with Devin Townsend, and a whole lot more. But before I get started, just a reminder to subscribe to our YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on all our socials, and check out progreport.com. And now my chat with Anthony Vanacore from O. I want to go ahead and get started with your personal history because I think that's fascinating. How did you get started in music, being a drummer, ending up in China? Talk us through it.
Okay, so I came to China actually the very first time I came to China was actually in 2009 into 2010. This was pretty much during the new year, crossing over the New Year's. And basically what happened was it was very, very just by chance, a friend of mine was invited to do a tour in China. She was a musician with an orchestra actually, and the orchestra needed a drummer. And she contacted me and said this conductor was going to China, and it just happened to be during Christmas time, the New Year's. It was about a 3-week tour, and I agreed to it because the thought of going to China had never occurred to me in my life, and it sounded fascinating. And it was at the time I was in graduate school, and basically there was no pay, but everything was paid for, of course.
Right.
And we went, and it blew my mind, because we went everywhere. I mean, we went as far north, as far south. We really covered a lot of ground. I mean, it was an intense tour actually, because it was almost concerts every night. It was like you play the concert the next morning, you're taking a plane to go somewhere else. I mean, it was pretty jam packed, but the experience fascinated me. And when I returned to New York City, where I was living at the time, and actually where I was residing was pretty much like a Chinatown in Queens, in a section called Flushing, which was a big Chinese community there. And so when I returned there, I kind of had a new perspective on the area I was living, of course, because I had just came back from China. And the experience left a big impact on me, culturally, and the language, and just everything about it. And then the following year, that same orchestra was invited back, and we did the tour again. And it was the same kind of deal. It was basically during the Christmas, New Year's. So this was 2010 to 2011.
Wow.
And after that finished, came back again. And like now I was even more hooked, like just on the whole idea of the country and the language and the culture and everything. And all of a sudden, I just became really fascinated with learning the language, Chinese. So I went on like a self-study binge for about a year. I was listening to tapes. I found some public domain like language program that they used to train like CIA agents and like government agents with, made in the 70s. It's called like FSI, Foreign Service Institute or something. It was all public domain online. So I found this like enormous like curriculum. It was jam-packed with audio and all kinds of learning materials. So I was going through this for about a year. And then the chance to go to China, a job opportunity, I was making some inquiries, of course, and a job opportunity came up, playing with a band in a city called Hangzhou. I was there. Hangzhou is in the south. It's not far from Shanghai. It's pretty close to Shanghai. And I ended up playing in Hangzhou with this band. It was kind of a jazz band, and we played every night for almost a year.
Wow.
And that's how I started in China. I was living in Hangzhou for about 3 years, and that was actually a great experience for me because during those 3 years, I almost didn't speak any English. So I was really just immersed in it. You know what I mean? But the music scene in Hangzhou, there's really not a whole lot going on. At the time, I was actually going to Shanghai almost every weekend for a while, because there's a short train ride there, about not even an hour, about an hour train ride. So I would be going there all the time because there's a much more robust music scene there. And then coincidentally, one night in Shanghai, I bumped into a friend of mine who was in the same system of schools that I was into in New York City. It was called CUNY, City University of New York. I was in Queens College, but he was in City College. But we used to hang out at the same kind of jam session. Great saxophone player, a friend of mine named Nat. And he told, he at the time he was living in Beijing, and I had no idea he was in China also. So it was, it's a huge coincidence. So he was telling me about Beijing and the scene there and everything. And, I got really interested in it. So one day I went there and played some gigs with him. And just to kind of check out the scene. And I kind of really liked it. I think Beijing in the entire country of China probably has the most diverse music scene. There's kind of like an underground scene here. All kinds of music. You have a lot of experimental music. You have rock. You have jazz, classical. You name it, pop. I mean, it's there's a lot of interesting music going on here. So then I moved from living in the South when I was in Hangzhou in 2015. I moved to Beijing, and I've been in Beijing ever since. And been very busy. And I've always been interested in composition. I've met a lot of musicians here. Before I was playing with Jing and Chris in different bands, doing all kinds of stuff, and they're close friends of mine. And I've always been writing intermittently throughout my whole life, writing music. Since I've started being involved with music. And so this was probably in 2018 or so. I had a few songs written, and I showed to the guys, to Jing and Chris, and asked them if they'd be interested in laying down some tracks. So they did it. These were 4 tracks that were actually off the first album.
Okay.
And in 2019, I had written vocal melodies. In fact, actually, the original plan was there's kind of like a famous Chinese singer here. I guess she's more in like the pop realm. I won't mention her name. Just because I had contacted her and she never responded, but it's actually kind of a blessing. It's actually kind of a blessing she never responded. But I've heard her recordings before, and she has a very powerful voice, and she can sing very high. She sings rock kind of style really well, so that's why I thought of this singer. I reached a friend of mine who's pretty famous guy here in China. He's kind of like the godfather of rock and roll. He helped me reach out to her. But anyway, I sent 2 emails. She never responded. So I kind of started to give up on that idea after waiting for a while. And then a former student of mine actually, because I put a message out on like the Chinese social media that there was a project going on. At this time, there's no band name. This was in 2019. And, we were looking for a vocalist, and, if anybody would be interested, whatnot. So my former student, my friend now, he reached out to me and said, "Yeah, I know a singer," and it happened to be Lynn. And she sent me like just a couple of simple demos that she had sung on before. And she sent them to me, and I thought they sounded interesting. I could hear a lot of potential. And then we scheduled a time to meet in 2019. This was the summer of 2019, and just started doing demos. And yeah, I was just mind blown, at the time, because it just like, there was a lot of the way she was interpreting the melodies. At the time, there was no lyrics. I was just letting her interpret the melodies, and I'll give a little direction. Like, this is kind of more raspy. This can be more airy sounding. Those kind of very vague general directions. But I wanted to let her kind of interpret how she felt it and how she wanted to, sing the melody lines. And yeah, it just blew my mind that day. And she was the very first singer who came in. There was a few other people that contacted me, but honestly, after that day, I didn't think there was any need to hear anymore. So in many ways, we got really lucky, because we didn't have this long drawn out process. And actually, it was a blessing that this other singer, the kind of the famous pop singer who I reached out to, is kind of a blessing that she never responded to me. Sure. Because I don't think she would have given me the time and the patience and, to get really deep into it. You know what I mean? So it worked out, you know what I mean? And this was in the summer of 2019. After about a month or so, I finally told Lynn, I was like, "Hey, would you be interested in joining the project?" And, she was very excited about it. And now it was time to, for her to write lyrics and for us to actually like officially record the parts. So that all happened in, yeah, the fall of 2019, and at the time there was only 4 songs written. Um, and after they were recorded, those, and I can tell you the four songs off the first record were that were originally written at before there was even the concept of making an album out of it, were
Right.
Travel, Dark, Light, and Ghost. It was
Okay.
originally those four tunes were actually kind of written as like a little suite, a musical suite. Um, but after those songs were finished, recording wise, vocally and instrumentally, I knew right away that there was something interesting going on, and something really special with how this was turning out. I knew in my heart this was something different and something that deserved to, be turned into an album. I felt like if we just made like a short little EP or a demo, like it wouldn't really have the same kind of impact. So I proceeded to write the remaining 4 songs on the album. Actually, Jing wrote 2 of the songs on that album.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's 8 songs. So I wrote about 6 of them, and some of them were kind of collaborative as well. So, but yeah, anyway, there was 4 additional songs written, and these were all pretty much completed in 2020. Um, and then the COVID hit. This was actually, some of the songs weren't completed vocally. I could have a little bit of my this timeline a little bit messed up right now in my head, but I'm,
Well,
approximately.
no one remembers what time was what with COVID anymore.
Exactly. It's just, yeah, it's just like a
Mhm.
big blur. So anyway, the long and short of it is, the complete recording of the first album was all completed probably in the spring of 2021. There was a big delay because of COVID, of course. Um, and we got it mixed. By the time it was done mixed, I believe it was about August of 2021. Yeah, August of 2021, I believe. Um, and then, yeah, okay, because the first time I spoke to Thomas was 2021. Right. Wow, time goes so fast. So, yeah, just the album was finished, and you know, upon its completion, I was like kind of mind blown in a way, because like it just seemed like, where did this thing come from? I mean, even me kind of being so involved with it, but upon its completion and hearing it, I was like, I've never heard anything quite like this before. And I knew it was something interesting and different and unique and special. Um and I started to think about, well, maybe we can get some label interest in this.
Well,
And actually,
I have
okay,
a
go ahead.
have a couple of questions to interject
Yeah.
there. Did you always envision it being sung in Chinese? Was that always the idea, or were
Um
you thinking English? Just
Actually, I wasn't thinking English at all, because, well, first and foremost, because Lynn, her her mother language is Chinese.
right, but before
She
she entered into the picture, right? When you were writing the songs.
Okay, that's a good question. You know what? To be honest, I didn't really have a very, very concrete idea about that at the time. But I guess maybe subconsciously, I knew it was probably just by virtue of the fact that I was in China,
Yeah.
that we were searching for a singer. It was probably going to be the lyrics were probably going to be in Chinese, which I kind of, which I in I love it. I think the sound of it, and it really fits the band. Just the sound of the language being sung in. I think that just adds to the
Well, the way she
to the
sings in there, yeah,
uniqueness of it.
it just works in this particular world that you guys have made. But also, not being familiar with a lot of bands from that area really at all. Um, how different sounding are you guys to other metal and sort of prog metal or whatever you want to call it in China?
I think it's like, yeah, it's completely different. I mean, there is quite a bit of metal in China, and some of it is really great. But aside from the fact that a lot of it, most of it is sung in Chinese, which is very cool. I would still say the majority of it is still pretty much in the box, metal.
Right.
There's death metal here, but they're all very, I would say they all fit very cleanly in the metalcore, death metal, thrash, kind of hardcore. I mean, I think most of the bands, they fit pretty cleanly in all those kind of subgenres, metal
Right. And they model
subgenres. Like
after the bands, sort of like, you can find a
more
reference
more
point.
or less, more or less. There are some cool metal bands here for sure that, for example, they might have taken some Chinese traditional instruments and blended it into their sound, which I've heard, which is pretty cool. But I would say the majority of it is pretty much, there's nothing that I've heard that's too, you know, in a category of its own.
So
Um,
what makes your sound? What influences make your sound? Because I hear a lot of different things. But also even as you, the drummer, I find you don't really play even traditionally, right? It's very weird time signatures and odd time things, and you're you're putting snare beats where you wouldn't expect them to be, and that kind of stuff. So where does that combination come from with you and the other guys and your own drumming influence?
um, well, I guess I come from a wide range of influences and a wide range of musical backgrounds. My musical backgrounds are rooted in metal and heavy music. The things that got me into music when I was a kid are, pretty much heavy music. Um, Injustice for All was like a life changer for me. I was like 10 or 11 years old,
Right.
when I heard that. And that changed my life. I remember sitting in class, I was in like fifth grade or something, and I couldn't pay attention to anything because just like the guitar solo, the Blacken was just looping in my brain, and I would just, as soon as the bell rang, I would just run home and sit my ass in front of the stereo and just listen to the album on repeat over and over. It was that kind of obsession, which is a great thing. I think in hindsight, like I miss the days of like, the how sacred like a CD was back then, or
Yeah.
a tape.
It was
You
a great way to experience music that you don't get anymore.
yeah, it's gone. But that's another story. Um, but yeah, I mean, from Metallica, Faith No More, Sepultura, Pantera, uh, God, all the Slayer, all the bands, and then kind of it started to branch out more into Prog and Dream Theater and Rush. Um, and then from Prague, you kind of get into fusion and fusion rock, Alan Holdsworth, and um, from there you start to come across jazz. What I mean, a lot of people, if a lot, especially younger people, like their um, introduction to jazz probably maybe comes from more kind of fusion and fusion rock, Chick Corea, Electric Band, and all these things. And then you find out about more kind of traditional jazz. So like for me anyway, my taste just kept. It never became like where, oh, I like this now, I don't like that. In fact, I was just listening to. I was just on the train ride. I was coming back from a city called Nanjing here in China, back to Beijing, and I was listening to the Real Thing, Faith No More record, which was one of the first records that I fell in love with. And I'm like, I'm listening to this, I'm like, I I totally get why I love it. I mean, I love it just as much now as I did back then.
Yep.
So
Good stuff.
my musical taste, it was never like, as I evolved, or as I branched out rather, it was never like, a lot of music that I used to listen, I threw under the rug. It was just I felt like music, it's like almost food for your soul. It's you wouldn't want to eat you probably wouldn't want to eat a cheeseburger every single day. You know what I mean? So it's like music, to me, it's the same thing. It's like based on how you're feeling and your emotional state, you know, drawing from different kind of music. think it's a wonderful thing. So as I became more aware that music was what I wanted to do as a profession, I also took it seriously in the fact that, well, I want to study as much different music as I can, different styles of music. I want to understand the history of different music, the compositional aspects of it. Um, you know, I was thinking more in terms of, well, if I want to be a professional musician, I have my homework, that I have to do. So in the pursuit of that, you don't have a choice. You're going to become exposed to a lot of different types of music. When I went to undergrad, it was classical. Um, and the cool thing about that was, I got exposed to all kinds of music. It wasn't just classical period and romantic period, but also a lot of 20th century classical music and contemporary, modern, avant-garde. I mean, exposed to a wide range of different kinds of compositions and composers and and feels and everything, and also just learning about composition and counterpoint and harmony and all these things. I mean, I love that stuff. It was just fascinating to me. So even as although drums are my principal instrument, I also did spend a lot of time working on piano, because when you're dealing with composition, you need to have some kind of facility on an instrument, on a harmonic instrument.
Yep.
So for me, piano was a little bit more accessible than playing guitar, for example. So even with like when I write everything, it's mostly on keyboard or piano, or I sing. Like I'll have melodies in my head or something, and I'll just sing them, and then I'll try to play them on the keyboard, and eventually they slowly mold into a structure and songs.
But this all makes
So
sense
there's
because that's how you're able to bring in such sort of dissonant sounds together that make them work, because you have an understanding of all the things that go into things like classical and jazz and making different sounds work. I think that's probably maybe not even realizing that's what's happening, but that seems to be how it is all coming together.
Yeah, it could be, and that could be why the music sounds different than a lot of other music. Because it is coming from a wide range of different backgrounds and knowledge. Not that I'm this genius by any stretch of the imagination,
No, but it's just
but
stuff that the average maybe guitar player or piano player that's learning pop music wouldn't have. You know what I mean? I just maybe it's assuming that, um, but I think well, moving that into the first record, I mean, that was certainly a surprising sound for a lot of people. There was a lot of people online that I saw really were blown away by it, and others that were like confused by it, right? Like, what? I don't even know what this is. That had to have been interesting for you to see. Um,
yeah, sure.
but but then you end up getting involved with Devin, who I guess co-produced and mixed the new record. Um, and I
Yep.
couldn't think of a better person to partner you guys up with, really, because he's the type of person that throughout his career has been open to everything and done everything,
Yep.
and has never said no to a style to try or whatever. So, um, and also production wise is a really good fit. I mean, I think he was able to bring out a lot of what you guys do well and accentuate that. So talk about, well, first getting in touch with him, meeting him, that initial conversation, and then maybe some stories about working with him.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Everything you just said. I think it was Devin's involvement with this record was unbelievable. It was amazing. Um, yeah, it's interesting because when we first signed with Inside Out, um, Thomas pretty much right at the get go had mentioned Devin. Because when I first met Thomas, we had a really nice conversation, and he was curious about my influences, and of course I mentioned Devin. I said he's a huge influence on me because his music is so eclectic, and he's not bound by any kind of, genre, so to say. I mean, obviously there's threads that I think, go that are alive in a lot of his music, but there's a lot of surprises in Devin's music, which I love, but it still has a vibe to it that's, very identifiable, I feel like,
Yeah.
but still it's really can go anywhere. Um, and I always love that. And I love how like his music, I feel like he just keeps getting better. It's an inspiration because he's been going at it for so long. He has such a huge output, and I feel like it's just always like it's always just consistently amazing. And that's a huge inspiration to me because it's like, well, even as you get a little older in your career, it doesn't mean, you kind of have to start, you know, becoming a cliche of yourself
Right.
or start running out of
Yeah.
ideas. It's just, yeah. So for me, it's very inspiring. But yeah, when I had mentioned that to Thomas, he he pretty much right away thought it would probably be a good idea if at some point we, hooked up with them and collaborated. So there was already kind of the seed, like the idea, this idea that at some point, you know, perhaps on the second album, if time permitted for him, that he would be down to work with it. And luckily the time worked out. So this was in, let's see, what is it, 2024? This was in the very beginning of 2023. Thomas sent out an email to the both of us, just introducing us. Yeah, and that was an amazing experience for me too. Just the very first time email, I was like, wow, this
Right.
is like what guy I've been, I'm such an admirer of his work for so many years. 20 years, 20 more than 20 years. And here I am, chatting with them on an email. So there was a little bit of that kind of starstruck kind of kind of
Yeah.
vibe going there for a second. Um, but yeah, Devin and I, this was, yeah, January of 2023. I think we had our first kind of conversation, video chat, just to say hello and just chat for a while. And I could tell right away he was a super sweet guy. He is a super sweet guy. It's just right away. You just get that feeling. And he let me know right away from the get go. He said, he's like, listen, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to be trying to dictate to you how it's got to be. You know what I mean? So right away, he made me feel very comfortable and at ease because I knew, you know, that he respected what was already kind of there was a vibe to the band, and
Right.
he wasn't planning on like, you know, enforcing his own, kind of ideas or anything. And he was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want, basically, in terms of mixing. And so right away, I was very appreciative of that because, he's Devin Townsend. He's been at this for so many years. His body of work, his output is pretty enormous. And, I'm just this dude, you know. So the fact that he was, being this, you know, accommodating and respectful and everything, it really meant a lot to me and put me at ease. Um, and then this was, I believe, a few months later, because at the time when we had first spoke, the record wasn't finished recording yet.
Hmm.
It pretty much got finished in April, I think, of 2023. So I sent him the tracks, and I was a little nervous, of course, when I sent the tracks because I don't know what he's going to think of the music, and obviously it wasn't mixed. But his first reaction was made me even feel more at ease because he was really into it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I was like, thank God, because if he got the tracks, he's like, all right, it's cool, I'd be like, But the fact that he was really stoked about it made me feel really good. And he asked me, he said, I have some ideas, because the original agreement, the original arrangement was, mixing. But he said, I have some ideas and stuff about some of the stuff would you mind if I try it? I said, of course, yeah. So he started, I sent him like some of the MIDI files, because MIDI is just information. You could take the MIDI files and you could put different sounds on them, and it's the same notes, but it's just different
Right.
sounds. So there are a few cases where some of the MIDI, some of the synth stuff is, his decisions and choices in terms of timbre. And I think he did amazing. I mean, just because he heard things that I didn't hear.
So were there moments
You know
when
what I
he
mean?
sent you stuff back where you went, "Oh my God, this is like I didn't expect this, but it's great."
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, in the very beginning, there was some things that were a little further away than how I originally envisioned it. So in some cases, I was like, well, I don't know, but again, he was so sweet throughout the whole process. It was never like, oh, it's got to be this way. But it was slowly becoming clear that, this was like a co-producer thing kind of arrangement. It wasn't just strictly mixing anymore, because the way he really structured the sounds, and even he added, he heard some guitar parts that weren't written there. So he personally himself, added a couple guitar parts here and there that he thought could like beef up some stuff. So I said, yeah, man, go for it. And, he had to go on tour with Dream Theater
Right.
and Animals as Leaders. I remember this was last summer.
Hmm.
They had the Dream Theater kind of had that festival they were doing. So the mixing was pretty much put on hold for a month and a half or so. When he got back in August, everything was basically at like everything was organized. He had his Pro Tools sessions all set up, and all the songs were kind of mixed to an extent that now we can get into details. So from August we started to do Zoom meetings, and this is what we were talking about before, the Vancouver, you know, uh, Beijing time difference. But actually, it was funny because that August I was on vacation with my wife, who's Korean, who lives in Beijing with me. She's an amazing pianist, Asian. So, but we were on a little vacation to visit her family in Korea, in South Korea. There's a nice island in the south of South Korea called Jeju Island. So we were there just for a few days, but this was coincided with the time where we had, because Devin also, his time is limited, and also he did have some shows here and there. I think he had to go to Australia in August, or I forget,
Yeah.
but anyway, whenever he was available to do the Zoom meetings, I would do everything I could, to make it happen.
You guys were never in person, right? It was always remote.
No, it was always remote. I don't think it just logistically. I think it actually, in hindsight, it was better that it was remote, because it could give him space. And if I went there, it would have been like, well, now we're going to do it all in this block of time. So the nice thing about
Yeah.
doing it remotely was, we could spend a couple hours, and 2 or 3 days later, organize another time, spend 2 or 3, 4 hours, and maybe the next day, maybe a few days later, maybe a week later. You know what I mean? So there was time for like stuff to breathe, and the whole process of meeting with it was about a month and a half or 2 months. I would say we met 8 to 10 times, probably about 10 times. But it was funny because I was saying, I was on vacation with my wife, and we were staying in like hotels or inns together and stuff, and the rooms were small usually wherever we're staying. So I'm waking up at like 2 a.m. I don't want to wake her up, so you know I'm like in the bathroom on the toilet, like with the door shut, trying to talk quietly,
So
talking with
funny.
Devin about while we're doing the mixing. So it was pretty funny.
Yeah,
Um,
that's wild.
yeah, but he was. I mean, the guy is unbelievable. I mean, it's just to watch him work in real time. A lot of the time I didn't want to bother him, because like he was doing his thing, so I would just sit there.
Right.
Sometimes I would just be sitting there watching, and like a half hour, 45 minutes would go by. I mean, I would only interject if I really heard something that might have been like I wasn't sure he was aware of. But it was interesting because sometimes I would be as he was mixing and producing all in this stuff in real time, there was moments where, I would hear something a bit and I'd make a mental note of that. Oh, I'd like him to, bring this up a little bit or bring that down a little bit or whatever. And sometimes it was like we had this kind of, I mean, I don't know, he probably wasn't aware of it, but it was almost like we had this kind of telepathic kind of communication going on, because a lot of the little minor details that I was making mental notes of, later on in the process, he would go back and he would just fix them,
Right.
and I ended up not even having to say anything. I was thinking about certain little details, the sound of the
Perfect.
snare
Yeah.
drum, or just raise this or lower that, or whatever, you know what I mean? And it was just like, you know, so I learned to just try not to say too much. I didn't want to get in his way. But
Well, I
but
mean, I
yeah,
think
he
it
he
turned out
was.
it turned out really cool. I think it's one of the cooler records that most people are going to hear this year, and it just sounds awesome. You can't
Thank
go
you.
wrong with a
Thank you so
Devin
much.
Devin production. I think it's almost like he should just produce everybody. 'Cause-
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're super, you know, lucky and grateful, for the whole, and of course Thomas, because he put it all into motion. It's because of him that this happened.
Yeah.
So,
And then I
you
just saw
know,
recently you did an interview bit with Devin on his podcast, which came out. So that's pretty cool that he's still,
yeah.
also, I mean, he didn't just do the record and then disregard it, right? He's talking about it, he's speaking with you, he's helping promote it. So I think that's just awesome.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. I couldn't ask for any more. I mean, he with this project, he really went above and beyond, like in every possible way. I mean, the amount of time and care and energy and everything he put into this, it's just like far beyond I ever imagined, because we started this in as early as April. Obviously there's interruptions in between, but you know, I don't think the whole mixing thing was done until maybe October.
Right.
So he wasn't trying to rush through it in any way. In fact, it was the opposite. He was like, he wanted to get it right. You know what I mean? And I couldn't be more thankful and appreciative of that. And he really spent a lot of time and put. I mean, I'm sure he put as much care into it as he would his own record. His own music. So for that, I mean, eternally grateful. Um, and of course, I think the finished product kind of speaks for itself. I think yeah, it sounds amazing. I mean, obviously my opinion is biased, but but yeah, I
No, it
mean, I
does. I
couldn't
mean,
be I couldn't be more happy with it.
have you guys played any, you haven't played a show yet as a band, right? Or have you?
Nope, we haven't played a show
So
yet.
are you planning on
And
doing something soon or?
yeah, well, I wouldn't say exactly soon, as in like the next few months. But it's definitely on the radar, and there's things in the works right now that we're trying to um get get going. So live performance is definitely in the future for the band. It's obviously going to take a lot of preparation. It has to be done right, because the music is it's pretty involved, and you know there's a lot of synthesizers and harmony, vocal, especially vocal harmony. It's a huge component of the music, and it's got to be there live. So Lynn is just a single person. I mean, maybe in the future, if there's a budget to bring a little choir on tour, then we
Right.
could
Yeah,
talk
because
about doing the
she
harmonies
sings with
live.
a
But
lot of harmonies going on. Yeah.
there's a lot of I mean, it's an integral part of the music. That's just part of it. I mean, some of the tracks actually on the second album, because instrumentally they were so dense, I made a conscious, you know, I made a conscious decision to actually keep the vocal harmony sparse, or harmonyless. Actually, there's a couple tracks in the album where it's like almost harmonyless. But of course, there's a couple of tracks. There's quite a few tracks where it's very dense harmony. So that's just one of the examples of live performance. There's a lot of details that have to be worked out to make the music come across, um, as well as it does on the album. And so that there's going to be challenges with it. I mean, even I hear people seeing, online. I've seen some comments like, how are they going to do this live with the vocals? There's so many harmonies. But it's just, I think that's just a reality of a lot of bands now.
Yeah.
There's backing tracks. It's either you do that, or you're going to be missing out a lot on, especially for this band, the vocal harmony. It's just, I think it's just so integral to the music. It can't not be there in a live show.
Right.
So there's that, and of course, just interest in the band to play live. But yeah, the short answer is it's on the to-do list, and we're currently working on making it happen. So hopefully, I would say the latest that the band will start playing live, because there aren't anything scheduled as of this moment. But I would say the absolute latest that the band will start playing live will be 2025, because especially Europe festivals and places, everything's pretty much already booked for the rest of the year. So
Right.
logistically, it's going to be a little bit difficult to make it happen this year. But at the same time, that could be nice, because it gives us a lot of time to prepare, and it might even give me time to start working on album 3. Because the one thing I'm a little worried about playing live is, once you start doing that, then it's hard to find the time and energy to keep writing. So if I can give myself a little bit of a nice little chunk of time to get some writing in, is also a good thing.
Awesome, man. Well, congrats on everything. I hope people check out the record. I think it's going to be something really cool throughout the year for people to get into. The new O album, OU spelled, Frailty, comes out April 26th. Check out the title track, which is out now, or maybe by the time this airs, there'll be another single out. And follow Devin Townsend too, because he talks about the record, and keep up to what he's doing. All right, man. Hey, it's late over there for you. I'll talk to you another time. All right, get some sleep.
All right, thank you, Roy.
Thanks, brother.
We'll
I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Talk soon. Bye.
Hey, thanks for checking out the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on all our socials and ProgReport.com, and we'll see you all again real soon. Thanks.